Be me, Claire, 24, have a brother, Luke. We grew up together. He was adopted, always my best friend. Dad was a good man, devout Christian, worked hard. Let me tell you how everything went wrong. Mom died when I was little. Don't remember much about it. Dad was lost without her, didn't know how to handle a young girl alone. That's when Luke came into our lives through church adoption program. He was maybe a year older than me, had been bouncing between homes. First time I saw Luke, he was this quiet, gentle kid sitting in our living room. Dad introduced him as my new brother. At first I was suspicious, didn't want to share my dad, but Luke was different from other boys I knew. He was soft-spoken, liked books more than sports, drew pictures of flowers. Dad, Arthur, was the kind of father every kid deserves. Worked construction all day, came home dirty and tired, but always smiled at us. Read us Bible stories every night before bed. Took us to church every Sunday without fail. Luke seemed to love the routine as much as I did. Elementary school years were golden. Luke and I walked to school together, shared the same group of friends. He was protective of me, but in a gentle way. Other kids sometimes asked why we looked nothing alike. We'd just shrug and say he was adopted. No big deal. Looking back, there were signs even then. Luke preferred playing house to cops and robbers, always wanted to be the mom or the teacher when we played pretend. He'd braid my hair and was surprisingly good at it. Dad would watch us play with this confused but loving expression. Middle school started getting weird in ways I didn't understand. Luke began spending more time in his room. He'd lock the door and I could hear him talking to himself in there. Sometimes I'd catch him looking in mirrors for long periods. When I asked what he was doing, he'd just change the subject. He started asking me about girl stuff around 7th grade, how it felt to wear dresses, what makeup was like. I thought he was just curious about his sister's world, answered his questions without thinking much of it. Dad overheard a few times and got this worried look. High school is when everything really started changing. Luke began experimenting with his appearance in small ways. First, it was just letting his hair grow longer than Dad liked. Then, he started wearing my old skinny jeans when Dad wasn't looking. I thought it was cool and rebellious, covered for him constantly. Sometime during freshman year, Luke started wearing makeup. Just a little at first, some of my old lip gloss or mascara. He'd put it on at school and wash it off before coming home. I helped him learn how to apply it properly. Told him it made his eyes look pretty, which made him smile. Dad noticed the changes, but didn't know what to make of them. Would ask Luke about his longer hair or tight clothes. Luke would get defensive and storm off to his room. I'd tell Dad it was just a phase, that all teenagers experiment. Dad would nod, but I could see the worry growing in his eyes. By sophomore year, Luke was fully committed to looking more feminine, started wearing my clothes to school regularly, asked me to help him shop for his own girl clothes. We'd go to the mall and he'd try on dresses in the fitting rooms. His face would light up in ways I'd never seen before. The first time Luke wore a dress to school was terrifying for both of us. He was shaking that morning, asking if he looked okay. I told him he looked beautiful and meant it. Dad saw him leave and just stood there, frozen. That evening's dinner was the most uncomfortable silence of my life. Dad tried to have serious talks with Luke about his choices, would sit him down and ask what was going on in his head. Luke would just say he was figuring himself out. Dad would reference Bible verses about God's plan. Luke would get angry and accuse Dad of not loving him. I became Luke's biggest defender during these family conflicts. Told Dad he was being closed-minded and old-fashioned, said Luke was just expressing his creativity and individuality, used terms I'd learned in school about acceptance and tolerance. Dad would listen quietly and then go work in his garage. Junior year brought even more dramatic changes. Luke started going by feminine nicknames with friends at school. asked teachers to use different pronouns in class, joined drama club, and always auditioned for female roles. His confidence was growing, but Dad's confusion was deepening. Around this time, Luke started talking about feeling wrong in his body. Would tell me late at night that he didn't understand why he was born male. Said he'd always felt like a girl trapped in the wrong form. I listened and tried to be supportive, like a good sister should. Had no idea how serious this was or where it was leading. Senior year was when Luke first used the word transgender. Explained to me what it meant, how some people are born in wrong bodies. Said he'd been researching online and talking to counselors at school. Asked if I would support him if he wanted to transition. I said yes without hesitation. Thought I was being a good ally. Graduation was awkward because Luke wanted to wear a dress under his gown. Dad reluctantly agreed after I argued it was his special day. The photos from that ceremony showed Dad's forced smile clearly. Luke looked radiant and happy. Dad looked like he was dying inside. I was caught between celebrating Luke and comforting Dad. College years made everything more complicated. Luke and I went to different schools, stayed in touch through calls. He started exploring his identity more freely away from Dad's watchful eyes, began experimenting with hormones he'd gotten from somewhere. I supported him over the phone while Dad suffered alone at home. During winter break of my sophomore year, Luke made his announcement, told Dad and me that he was officially transgender, said he'd been living as a woman at college for months, wanted us to start calling him Luna instead of Luke. Dad's face went completely white when he heard this. I immediately started using Luna's new name and pronouns, corrected Dad whenever he slipped up and used Luke, told Luna how proud I was of her courage and authenticity. Dad just retreated further into himself with each conversation. The house became a battlefield of competing loyalties. Luna started hormone replacement therapy sometime that spring. Her voice began changing. Her body started developing differently. She'd call me excited about each new change she noticed, posted photos online documenting her transformation journey. Dad stopped looking at family pictures altogether. Summer visits home became increasingly tense. Luna would arrive looking more feminine each time. Dad would find reasons to leave the house when she visited. I'd spend my time translating between them. Neither could understand the other's perspective. Luna's appearance changes were dramatic and rapid. Her face softened. Her body developed curves. She learned to walk and talk in more feminine ways, started dressing in ways that made her feel beautiful. Dad would stare at her like he was looking at a stranger. I threw myself into supporting Luna's transition, helped her shop for new clothes and makeup, celebrated each milestone in her journey, defended her choices to anyone who questioned them. Told myself I was being the perfect supportive sister. Meanwhile, Dad was slowly disappearing before my eyes. He stopped reading his Bible aloud at breakfast, quit singing hymns while he worked around the house. His friends from church called less frequently. I could see him shrinking into himself day by day. Luna's confidence grew as her transition progressed. She started dating and making new friends who knew her as female, posted constantly on social media about her happiness, talked about future surgeries and legal name changes. Her joy was infectious, but Dad couldn't see past his grief. The breaking point came during one of Luna's visits home. She was showing me photos of herself at some college party, looking radiant in a blue dress, surrounded by friends. Dad walked through the room and glanced at the pictures, said quietly that he didn't recognize the person in them. That night, Dad asked me who that girl was in our house. I explained again that it was Luke, just living as Luna now. Dad shook his head and said Luke was gone, that this Luna person had somehow taken his son's place. I didn't know how to argue with that logic. Dad's decline accelerated after that conversation. He started losing weight, eating less at every meal, stopped maintaining his appearance or caring about work, would sit in his chair for hours just staring out the window. I was watching him waste away from heartbreak. Luna was oblivious to Dad's suffering during this time. She was too caught up in her own journey of self-discovery, called constantly to share good news about her transition, asked why Dad didn't want to talk to her anymore. I made excuses rather than explaining his pain. Church became impossible for Dad to attend. People would ask about Luke, and he didn't know what to say. The congregation that once supported our family grew distant. Dad's faith, which had anchored his entire life, felt shaken. He stopped going altogether and lost his spiritual community. I found myself living two separate lives, supporting Luna's transition and celebrating her milestones, while watching Dad slowly die from grief and confusion. Neither of them understood what their choices were costing. I felt responsible for keeping both of them somehow okay. Luna started planning more serious medical procedures, research surgeries that would complete her physical transition. She was excited and scared, but determined to move forward. Dad overheard one of these conversations and left the room. I found him later in the garage, crying into his hands. The changes in Dad were becoming frightening. He'd forget to eat meals unless I reminded him. Lost interest in television, books, everything he used to enjoy. His eyes, which used to be so warm and lively, went dull. I was essentially taking care of a broken man. Luna's surgery date was scheduled for late summer. She asked if Dad would visit her during recovery, wanted his support and blessing for this final step. I couldn't tell her that he could barely function anymore. Made vague promises about him trying to be there. The week of Luna's surgery, she texted constant updates, photos from the hospital showing her excitement, videos talking about finally becoming her complete self. Meanwhile, Dad hadn't gotten out of his chair in days. The contrast between their experiences was heartbreaking. After Luna's surgery, her recovery updates were euphoric. She was healing well and felt more herself than ever. Posted photos of herself smiling despite the hospital setting. Thanked everyone for their support during her journey. Dad didn't even look up when I tried to show him the messages. Luna's happiness seemed to drain Dad's life force. The more complete she became, the more empty he appeared. She was finding herself while he was losing everything. I realized my support of her transition was killing him. But how could I abandon either of them? Dad stopped going to work regularly, using up sick days. His boss called to check on him, worried about his health. Co-workers sent get-well cards thinking he had a medical condition. In a way, they were right. He was dying of a broken heart. But there was no treatment for what was wrong with him. Luna came home to show off her surgical results. She looked absolutely radiant, more beautiful than ever. Her confidence was inspiring, and her joy was genuine. Dad took one look at her and went to his bedroom. I heard him sobbing through the walls that night. That visit was the last time Dad really engaged with Luna. He barely acknowledged her presence during meals, wouldn't make eye contact or respond to her attempts at conversation. Luna tried to hug him goodbye, and he just stood there limply. I watched both their hearts break in different ways. After Luna left, Dad asked me a devastating question: whether I thought the person who just visited was happy. I told him honestly that yes, she seemed genuinely happy. He nodded and said at least someone got what they wanted. I knew he was giving up on everything. Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next few weeks. He stopped eating regular meals, surviving on coffee and crackers. Barely spoke except to ask for basic necessities. Spent entire days sitting in his chair staring at nothing. I was watching a good man die of grief. Luna called regularly from her new apartment in another city, talking about job interviews and new friends she was making. Her voice was bright with possibility and hope. I updated her on Dad's health without revealing how serious it was. Couldn't bear to burden her newfound happiness. One evening in late fall, I came home to find something different. Dad was sitting in his usual chair but seemed more aware. He asked me to sit with him and talk about old memories, told stories about adopting Luke, about happy family times. His voice was soft and peaceful, in a way I hadn't heard in months. That conversation lasted hours, just Dad and me remembering. He talked about Luke's first Christmas with us, learning to ride a bike, shared memories of church picnics and summer vacations, said he was grateful for the years when we were a complete family. I treasured that evening as our last real connection. The next morning, I woke up and called for Dad from the kitchen. No response, which was unusual since he was always up early. Found him in his chair where he'd apparently spent the night. He looked peaceful, like he was finally resting. But when I got closer, I realized he wasn't breathing. Dad had died quietly in his sleep, still sitting in that old recliner, the chair where he'd spent his final months grieving his lost son. There was no note, no final message, just silence. His face was calm, but his eyes were empty of everything. The man who raised us had simply given up on living. Luna flew home immediately for the funeral arrangements. She looked stunning in her black dress, but cried constantly. People at the service whispered about both Dad's death and her transformation. She stood by his casket, telling him she was sorry, that she loved him and wished things could have been different. At the cemetery, Luna broke down completely, sobbed that she never meant for this to happen, said she just wanted to be herself and have Dad accept her, asked why love couldn't be enough to bridge their differences. I held her while she grieved the relationship they never had. After the funeral, we sat in Dad's empty house, surrounded by photos from when our family was intact. Luna asked directly if I blamed her for Dad's death. I told her honestly that I didn't know how to answer that. Some situations are too complicated for simple blame. Cleaning out Dad's belongings revealed the depth of his pain. Found journals where he wrote about losing his son. Photos he'd hidden away of Luke growing up. Letters he'd started but never sent to therapists. He'd been drowning in grief while trying to love us both. Luna moved back to her new city the following week. Promised to visit Dad's grave regularly and keep his memory alive. Said she would live fully to honor the man who raised her. I watched her drive away, beautiful and confident and free, while I stayed behind with the wreckage of our family. Months later, Luna seems to be thriving in her new life, sends photos from work events and social gatherings. Her smile is genuine and her confidence inspiring. She found herself and built the life she always dreamed of. I'm genuinely happy that she's finally at peace. I still live in Dad's house, unable to move forward. His chair remains exactly where he left it. Luke's old bedroom is untouched, a shrine to who he used to be. Sometimes I sit in Dad's spot and try to understand his perspective. How do you mourn someone who's still alive but completely changed? The last day haunts me constantly, replaying in my mind. I came home from work to find Luna visiting unexpectedly. She was sitting on our old couch, taking selfies for social media, posting about how happy she was, how she'd finally found herself. Her joy was radiant, but it felt like salt in an open wound. At the same time, I looked over at Dad in his usual chair. He was sleeping fitfully, his breathing shallow and labored. His clothes hung loose on his shrinking frame. There was no light left in his eyes, no strength in his body. He looked like he was already halfway gone. That evening, Dad went to bed earlier than usual, said he was tired, which had become his constant state. I helped him to his room and said good night. It was the last conversation we ever had. By morning, he was gone. Luna called me crying when I told her about finding him. Said she never realized how much her transition hurt him, that if she'd known, maybe she could have done things differently. But I told her the truth. Dad loved Luke, not Luna. Sometimes love isn't enough to accept fundamental changes. This is my story of impossible choices and incompatible needs. A brother who became a sister and found happiness. A father who lost his son and couldn't survive the grief. A daughter caught between two people she loved desperately. Sometimes families break in ways that can't be repaired. I don't share this story for sympathy or judgment. Just wanted someone to know what actually happened to us. How quickly a loving family can fall apart. When the people you love need contradictory things to survive, this is the truth about how we loved each other and lost everything.